Nobody gave her a last name. Nobody gave her a father. And for most of her childhood, nobody gave her enough to eat. The kids in her neighborhood had a name for her. They called her the toothpick. A girl so thin from hunger that the word fit like a second skin. She ducked under falling bombs, collected a scar on her chin that would stay with her forever, and grew up inside a kind of poverty that would have permanently broken most people. But it didn't break her. It built her. And what it built turned out to be one of the most extraordinary lives the world of cinema has ever witnessed. What you're about to hear is the real story of Sophia Loren, the truth behind the glamour, the sacrifice behind the stardom, and the decisions that made her unlike anyone else who ever stepped in front of a camera. Don't go anywhere. Because this story doesn't begin on a red carpet. It begins in a city being bombed into rubble. If you want to truly understand Sophia Loren, you have to start where she started. Not at Cannes, not at the Academy Awards. You have to go to a port town near Naples called Pozzuoli, a place so ground down by poverty during those years that survival itself was considered an achievement. This was not a place where dreams were encouraged. This was a place where the first priority, every single day, was getting through it. Sophia was born on September 20th, 1934, at a clinic in Rome called Clinica Regina Margherita. Her full given name was Sofia Costanza Brigida Villani Cicolone, an elaborate name for a child who owned almost nothing. Her mother, Romilda Villani, was a strikingly beautiful woman who had years earlier won a national beauty competition, a contest that carried with it a remarkable prize, a Hollywood screen test, and a trip to America. Because the judges had told her she resembled Greta Garbo, her own family refused to let her go. Suspicious of Hollywood, suspicious of America, they kept her home. And so Romilda Villani never made it to the screen. What she got instead was a man who would leave her far worse off than she started. His name was Riccardo Cicolone. On the surface he had everything. Good looks, a career as an engineer, a family that claimed aristocratic roots. Underneath that surface, he had nothing worth having. He got Romilda pregnant, refused to marry her, and walked away. He already had a woman. He already had a life. And Romilda was left standing alone with a newborn daughter and no support of any kind. She went home to Pozzuoli, to her mother's house, where the only option was to crowd together and try to survive. Sophia grew up in a two-bedroom apartment, packed with her mother, her grandmother, various aunts and uncles, and eventually her younger sister Maria, born in 1938. 8 people under one roof. Meals that were never enough. Days that were never easy. Her body showed it. The neighborhood had noticed how little she was eating, and the nickname Stuzzicadenti, toothpick, followed her everywhere. Malnourishment wasn't a phase for young Sophia. It was the baseline. Years later, the woman who had nursed her as an infant would say she had been the most unusual-looking newborn she had ever seen. And yet beneath the thinness and the scarcity and the crowded apartment, something was alive in that little girl that poverty simply could not reach. Her father came around almost never. On the rare occasions he appeared, young Sophia took in the details. Tall, well-dressed, with what she later described as a nose like a bird's beak. Those visits produced more confusion than comfort. She would encounter him only 3 times across her entire life, when she was 5, when she was 17, and then one final time in 1976 when he was dying. She chose to forgive him. Forgetting what he had done to her mother was a different matter entirely. And there is a particular chapter of this story that reveals exactly the kind of man Riccardo Cicolone was. When Sophia had become famous, when the world knew her name and the money had come and the career was undeniable, her father refused to legally acknowledge her younger sister Maria as his own child. So Sophia, the daughter he had abandoned without a second thought, had to hand him money in exchange for Maria being allowed to carry the Cicolone name. She purchased her sister's identity from the man who should have given it freely. If you want to understand both of these people in a single moment, that is the one. Then the war arrived. World War II transformed Pozzuoli into one of the most targeted locations in all of southern Italy. The harbor and the munitions facilities made it a priority for Allied bombing campaigns. Night after night, the family dragged their mattresses out of the apartment and into the railway tunnels nearby, trying to put stone and earth between themselves and what was falling from the sky. They spent nearly 8 months living this way. 8 months of alarms cutting through the dark, of explosions close enough to feel, of a child lying in a tunnel wondering whether morning would actually come. And one night, she found out how close it could get. Running toward the shelter during a raid, young Sophia was struck by a piece of shrapnel. It hit her in the chin. She was roughly 7 years old. The wound left a scar that never fully faded. For the rest of her life, Sophia Loren wore that mark on her face, a permanent record of the night the war nearly took her. And in a detail that says everything about who she was, it never once diminished what the world saw when it looked at her. It simply became part of the story. After that raid, the family abandoned Pozzuoli and pressed into Naples, relying on distant relatives to take them in. With no income and no stability, Sophia's grandmother turned the kitchen into a small production space, making cherry liquor to sell, and opened what amounted to a bar inside their living room. Romilda sat at the piano and played, young Maria sang, and Sophia, the toothpick, the girl with the chin scar, carried glasses and waited on the customers. That was the childhood, not recitals or celebrations, not the things children are supposed to have, just work and noise, and a mother's piano keeping the whole thing from falling apart. And through all of it, quietly, something inside her was taking shape. The turn came in 1949. Sophia was 14 years old when she entered a local beauty competition called Queen of the Sea. Second place. Not a win, but the prize attached to second place was a train ticket to Rome. One train ticket. That single object set everything else in motion. Mother and daughter boarded that train with almost nothing in their pockets. In Rome, Sophia began picking up what work she could find. Small modeling assignments, appearances in fumetti, the illustrated story magazines that Italians read widely at the time. She was working under the name Sophia Lazzaro. A bit part in the 1951 film Quo Vadis followed, then other small parts. The machinery was beginning to turn. The following year she entered the Miss Italia pageant. Again, not a winner, but the man watching from the audience that evening would matter far more than any crown. His name was Carlo Ponti, and he was a film producer who had been in the business long enough to know immediately when he was looking at something different. He was 22 years her senior. He was already married. None of that stopped him from sending her a note that evening suggesting she had a future in front of a camera. That note became the foundation of a relationship that would define the rest of both their lives. Ponti took her development seriously. Acting lessons, coaching, discipline, constant work. The name changed too. Sophia Lazzaro eventually gave way to the name that would travel around the world, Sophia Loren. The career shifted into a different gear in 1953 with a film called Aida. The story of how she got the role is one of those behind-the-scenes details that Hollywood rarely surfaces. Gina Lollobrigida, Loren's primary Italian rival at that moment, had been lined up to play the part and lip-sync the opera vocals provided by one of the country's most celebrated singers. Lollobrigida refused the lip-sync and walked. Ponti put Sophia forward. She stepped in, was painted entirely in deep tones to portray the Egyptian princess, and delivered something that stopped critics cold. The country took notice almost immediately. Hollywood followed in 1956. Paramount Pictures offered her a 5-picture contract, an almost unthinkable achievement for a young Italian actress who had been carrying glasses for bar customers just a few years before. The credits that followed read like a list of the most celebrated names the golden age of American cinema had to offer. Cary Grant, Frank Sinatra, John Wayne, Charlton Heston, Peter Sellers. And here is the detail that most people never learn about those early American years. When Sophia walked onto the set of her first Hollywood production, a 1957 war film called The Pride and the Passion, she could not speak a single word of English. Not one. She approached two of the most polished men in the business, Cary Grant and Frank Sinatra, and told them directly she had no English and needed their help. Both of them stepped forward. They worked with her on set, day after day, and she later said they were genuinely kind to her during one of the most difficult stretches of her professional life. What nobody saw coming was what Grant did next, and what Sophia didn't discuss openly for decades. Cary Grant fell in love with her. Completely. Irrevocably. He was 53, she was 23. He was married to his third wife, Betsy Drake. She was privately committed to Carlo Ponti, and none of those facts changed what was happening between them. In her memoir published in 2014, Sophia described the moment she first laid eyes on Grant at a cocktail party in Madrid in 1956, before production began. She wrote that when she saw that famous profile walk through the door, she felt as though she might faint on the spot. Grant was equally undone. Their very first exchange was awkward. He mixed up her name with that of her rival Lollobrigida and called her Miss Loren by accident. She didn't understand it was a joke, and they stumbled through the introduction, but what followed over the weeks of filming could not be stumbled through or explained away. When production ended, Grant had made a decision. He was prepared to leave his marriage. He was prepared to walk away from his entire existing life. He told her she was different from anyone he had encountered. He wrote her letters. He asked for her. And on the final day of filming in Spain, as evening came down over the countryside, Cary Grant got down and proposed. She said no. Carlo Ponti was where her loyalty lived. In her memoir, she was honest about how difficult that moment was. Resisting a man of Grant's magnitude was not a simple thing, but the choice had already been made, somewhere much earlier and much deeper than that Spanish sunset. Ponti had seen something in her before the world did. He had invested in her when she had nothing to offer except herself. She was not going to walk away from that. Grant was devastated. What made it worse was that the two were immediately brought together again for their next film, a comedy called Houseboat. Every working day required them to show up, perform, and behave as though none of it had happened, while Grant was still carrying the full weight of what she had said. The tension was visible to people on set. It was, by every account, one of the more painfully awkward professional situations that era produced. Grant found his footing eventually. Their working relationship held. But what had grown between them in Spain was permanently behind them. Sophia never expressed doubt about that choice. Not once, in any interview, across any decade. The one thing she admitted regretting about her marriage was something entirely small and human. She had always dreamed of a white dress. That image, a wedding in white, had lived inside her since she was a girl. She never got it, and that small absence, she said, was the only thing she ever wished had been different. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed to Old Tapes yet, go ahead and do it now. We're here every week with the real stories behind the names everyone thinks they know. Back to Sophia, because what came next wasn't just another chapter. It was the chapter that placed her permanently in the history books. In 1960, director Vittorio De Sica brought Sophia into a project called Two Women, La Cecchiara in Italian. The character was Cecira, a mother pulling her teenage daughter through the ruins of wartime Italy, trying to keep her alive as the bombs fell and the world collapsed around them. For Sophia, this was not just a role, it was memory. She had lived inside a version of that exact story as a child in Pozzuoli. De Sica gave her the space to put all of it on screen. What came out was something that silenced rooms. The performance was raw in a way that could not be manufactured or coached into existence. The awards came in waves: Cannes, the BAFTA, the New York Film Critics Circle, and then in early 1962, an Oscar nomination for Best Actress. She was 27 years old. The field around her was formidable. Audrey Hepburn, Natalie Wood, Piper Laurie, Geraldine Page, any of them could have taken it. Sophia was so certain she would lose that she stayed in Rome with Carlo Ponti, rather than make the trip to the ceremony. Her name was called. Sophia Loren became the first actor in Academy Awards history to win an Oscar for a performance delivered in a foreign language, the first in the entire history of the ceremony. She was not in the building. She heard about it from Rome, and that moment, a woman sitting at home expecting disappointment, learning instead that she had just made history, is one of the most quietly powerful images the golden age of Hollywood ever produced. A second nomination followed 3 years later for Marriage Italian Style in 1965. In 1991, the Academy presented her with an honorary Oscar acknowledging a body of work that spanned more than 100 films, 4 Golden Globes, a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a place on Entertainment Weekly's list of the 100 greatest movie stars in history, and through all of it, the same woman who had waited tables in Naples while her mother played piano remained somewhere underneath the glamour, unchanged. But the public record was only one layer of the life she was actually living. The legal situation surrounding her marriage to Carlo Ponti was a tangle unlike almost anything else in the history of Italian entertainment. Italian law at the time made divorce impossible. Ponti was already married. In 1957, they arranged what was known as a proxy marriage, a legal mechanism in which representatives sign in place of the couple, which ignited a scandal that reached the Vatican. Church officials condemned it publicly. Italian authorities raised the prospect of bigamy charges against both of them. Faced with that pressure, Ponti and Loren renounced their Italian citizenship and became citizens of France, where the legal path to a proper marriage was open. The ceremony that finally happened was quiet, in a French civil office, with no celebration and no white dress. Just the two of them, making it legal after years of fighting governments and institutions for the right to be recognized as a couple. What she wanted after all of that, more than anything the industry could give her, was children. She tried. She lost 2 pregnancies in ways that left her quietly devastated. Every medical resource Ponti could arrange was brought to bear on the next attempt. She spent the majority of her 3rd pregnancy confined to bed under constant supervision. On December 29, 1968, Carlo Ponti Jr. was born. 5 years later, the same discipline and the same careful watch over another long bed rest produced their 2nd son, Eduardo. On January 1, 1973, when Sophia was asked in later years what she considered the defining achievement of her life, she did not mention the Oscar. She mentioned her sons. Then the world came for her twice more, with no warning and no mercy. In 1974, a group of armed men broke into her suite at the Hampshire House Hotel in New York City, on Central Park South. They secured 4 members of the hotel staff. They assaulted her personal secretary, leaving him injured, and they took from her approximately $700,000 worth of jewelry, pieces accumulated over a lifetime of work. The experience shook her in a way that no amount of composure or professionalism could entirely absorb. Around the same period, the Italian tax authorities moved against her. The charge was that she had declared less income than she had earned and therefore underpaid her tax obligations. The case stretched through the courts across several years. In 1982, a judge issued a sentence of 30 days. On May 19, 1982, Sophia Loren, one of the most recognized actresses alive, walked through the entrance of a women's correctional facility in Italy. She served 17 days before her release. In the years that followed, she described those days as among the most affecting of her life, not because of the physical conditions, but because of something harder to name: the feeling of being stripped of everything she had built, of standing inside a system that reduced her to nothing more than a case number. She walked out, returned to work, and kept building. The decades that followed produced cookbooks, celebrated interviews, and words that people quoted long after the cameras stopped rolling. On the subject of her appearance, she once gave an answer that became perhaps the most repeated line in Hollywood interview history. "Everything you see," she said, "I owe to spaghetti." On attraction, she observed that it is 50% what you have and 50% what others believe you have. And on the circumstances of her own beginning, she said something that cuts to the bone. "The 2 greatest advantages I had at birth," she said, "were being born wise and being born poor." Only someone who had actually survived what she survived could say that and mean it. Carlo Ponti died in January 2007 at 94 years old. More than 5 decades had passed since the note he had sent her at a beauty pageant changed both of their lives. After his death, Sophia withdrew from public view for a time and turned toward her family, her sons, her grandchildren, the private world she had always protected. But she did not disappear permanently. In 2020, at 86 years old, she returned to the screen in a Netflix production called The Life Ahead, directed by her son Eduardo. The reviews were among the strongest she had received in years. Observers who had followed her career across decades said they had not seen her better. Once again, the world went quiet to watch her work. There is no simple category for what Sophia Loren was. She does not fit inside the standard shape of a Hollywood legend. What she was is rarer than that. She was someone who was handed nothing, no name, no father, no food, no safety, and who built, from all of that absence, something that the entire world eventually stopped to look at. The bombs left a mark on her face. The hunger left a mark in her memory. The father who never came back. The pregnancies she lost. The men who broke into her hotel room. The institution she walked into in 1982. None of it broke her. None of it even slowed her down for very long. The toothpick from Pozzuoli became one of the most celebrated women in the history of the moving image. The child who slept in train tunnels to survive became someone Hollywood crossed oceans to work with. And the actress who could not bring herself to attend the night she might win the most important award in her profession wound up making history in an empty apartment in Rome, thousands of miles from the stage where her name was called. There is nothing else quite like that story, and there is no one else quite like her. What does that story leave you thinking? Out of everything she went through, what do you think was the hardest part? The childhood she had no control over, The personal losses she endured in private, or the public moments that should never have happened to her at all? Tell me in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next one.